So this woman, her name's Chante, and Chante has a problem. There's a dead guy in her garage, and she doesn't want police to find out. So she's got to do something with this body. So Chante's 23, and this girl loves to party. And one night, it's a normal night, and she's at her friend's house. This woman, Fry. So Chante and Fry, they're having a good time, and they start drinking, and they start hitting that Zaza, and they're doing other activities. And then they both go out and they hit up the club. And while they're at the club, they meet up with some other people and they keep drinking, and it's Thirsty Thursday and they got 69-cent drink specials, so you know they're having a good time. And then about 2:30 a.m. rolls around and Chante's like, all right, it's time to go. So she and Fry, they get in the car and they leave. And she drops Fry off at Fry's house, and then she gets on the highway and she heads home. And so she's cruising along on this highway, and then suddenly, bam! Something hits her car, and she screams, and she swerves around, and glass flies everywhere. All right, let me stop you right there. Before we get to this part, we gotta talk about this other guy, Biggs. Now, Biggs is a regular working man, he's a bricklayer, and he's in a relationship with this woman, his girlfriend. And unfortunately, girlfriend is having some financial problems. So Biggs lends her whatever money he has on more than one occasion. And because of this, he starts to fall behind on his truck payments. So then his truck gets repossessed. Once his truck gets repossessed, he can't lay bricks anymore because his whole business revolves around him being able to use his truck. So he can't make any more money. And then he falls behind on all his bills, and Biggs ends up getting kicked out of his house. And soon enough, he finds himself homeless. So for the next 2 years, he's bouncing around from the streets to homeless shelters and back to the streets. And he does find some work along the way, but nothing that gets him totally back on his feet yet. And then one night, it's late out, and he's walking around town. Not sure where he's going so late, but he's going somewhere. And he goes to cross a section of the highway, and then suddenly, out of nowhere, kaboom! Biggs is struck by a car, Chante's car. And Chante hits Biggs so hard that he smashes through the windshield of her car and into her windshield, lodging his body halfway into the glass. Like his head and torso are inside the car and his legs are outside the car. So Chante screams and she starts panicking, like, what the hell just happened? So she pulls over and she gets out of her car and she's like, oh shit, bro is stuck in my windshield. And she tries to physically remove him from the windshield, but once she touches his body, she's like, nope. Can't do it. So she just hops back in her car and keeps driving with this dude lodged in her windshield. Now, from here, Chante doesn't do the obvious thing and drive directly to the hospital. No. Instead, she drives about a mile back to her house and she pulls into her garage. So there she is. She's parked in her garage and she's crying because, you know, who wouldn't be? And that is when she hears a moan. And it's coming from Biggs. He's seriously injured, but he's still alive. So she starts apologizing to him like, I'm so sorry, it was an accident. And after apologizing to him like 1,000 times, she then just leaves him there and goes inside the house. Later, as the night goes on, she comes back outside to check on him periodically. And each time she does, she doesn't like touch him or anything. She just apologizes to him over and over again for hitting him with her car. Now, here's the interesting thing. Chante isn't your average Jane who runs the register at TJ Maxx. Chante works as a CNA, a certified nursing assistant. So she knows what to do. She has the skills and training to render aid to this man. She just chooses not to. Instead, she calls Fry, crying, panicking, telling her to come over. So Fry comes over immediately and she's like, girl, what are you tripping about? And that's when Chante tells her what happened. And she takes her to the garage and shows her the man stuck halfway into her windshield. And Fry just freaks the fuck out and she just leaves. And of course Chante leaves with her and they both sleep at Fry's house, leaving Biggs back in Chante's garage. The next morning, Chante borrows Fry's car and she meets up with another friend. This guy, Cleet. Because Cleet just got out of prison and Chante thinks he might actually know how to help her. So Chante takes Cleet to her house and she shows him the car in her garage. And by this point, sadly, Biggs is dead. He didn't get medical attention in time and unfortunately, he didn't make it. So Cleet is there and he sees the body sticking out of the windshield and he freaks the out too. But luckily for Chante, Cleet does know how to help. And he gets an idea. And he calls his cousin to come over and assist them, and we'll just call him Cousin. So then the three of them, Chante, Cleet, and Cousin, they come up with a plan to get rid of this body. So they get Biggs, and they wrap him up in a blanket, and they put him in Cleet's car. And then they wait for it to get dark out, and they drive about 5 minutes away to a nearby park. And there, they dump Biggs's body. And they take their blanket back with them. The very next day, two older men, they walk into a nearby fire station. And they're like, hey, we were just at the park over here, and we think we saw a dead body. So the fire department calls 911, and police show up to the park, and that is where they find Biggs. So police immediately start investigating, and unfortunately, they have no leads. No one saw anything, no one knows anything, just a random homeless guy's body happens to show up in the park in the middle of the night. Meanwhile, Chante, she's trying to get back to her normal life. But unfortunately, she's having a little trouble. She's bummed out and she's all in her head and like, oh, is she gonna get caught? But despite all that, it seems like she may have just gotten away with murder. Until about 4 months later, Chante's with some friends at a party. And she's finally starting to feel better. She's starting to move on. She's getting over it. And she's putting this whole tragic incident behind her. So she's at this party one night and she's had a few drinks. And she starts feeling a little chatty. And she starts to tell people this crazy story about the time she got wasted at the club and drove home and accidentally unalived a homeless dude. And a friend at the party who's listening to this story, she's horrified. So she goes home and she calls the police and reports her. The very next day, police show up to Chante's house with a search warrant. And there they find her car, apparently still bloodstained and dented from the accident. So then, bam, they arrest her. Here's her mugshot. And they charge her with murder, and she goes to trial, and she's found guilty, and she's sentenced to 50 years in prison. While Cleet and Cousin, they also get found guilty, and they're also convicted. And they get sentenced to 10 years and 9 years, respectively. While Fry, she gets immunity in exchange for testifying against the other three. So, I guess that's nice. Shout out to Texas.